Hello and welcome to today's deep dive with the ESB generation and trading real-time visualization application, which was designed by Wondr from Ireland. My name is Ake Rudolf. I'm director of the UX Design Awards and head of strategy at International Design Center Berlin, IDZ in short, the awards organizer. The IDZ is a leading German non-profit design institution. We are a professional association that connects designers, design consultancies, and companies with more than 50 years of expertise. Our mission is to promote design as a driver of innovation in business and society. And the UX Design Awards are one of our flagship formats. With the awards, we promote the positive impact of people-oriented design worldwide. So the awards are judged and handed out by expert jury panels twice per year. The second of two participation calls actually this year is still open until the end of May. So if you're working on some great experience projects, no matter if it's products, services, prototypes, or even visionary concepts, please visit our website for more and make it count and take part. We would be glad to welcome also your work in the competition for the best in experience design. In our virtual event series, such as today, we invite awarded designers and teams to talk about their work and to share knowledge among the awards professional community. With our events, we invite you to discover different design approaches, learn more about product strategy and development processes, and to meet diverse members of our global UX community. You can join us twice a month for deep dives featuring professionals and companies and talent tracks that present up-and-coming UX designers. For more, follow us on LinkedIn or social media or subscribe to our newsletter. And now let me introduce today's award-winning product case study. The ESB real-time visualization application, so RTV in short, is a dashboard of complex power generation data from every power station in Ireland, including renewables. It was developed for ESB. It's a utility that provides competitive and sustainable energy solutions for the Irish public. The application facilitates the management of energy generation, and at the same time, it allows the business to make real-time decisions for trading energy, actually. And the jury handed this project a product award with the following statement. This project brings different tools and solutions together as a single source of truth. At its core lies the stakeholder management that establishes clear goals and KPIs, the involvement of different users in the development process, from management to specialized engineers, and iteratively validated solutions. Its impact allows a more efficient use of energy. The design puts a lot of attention to visualization according to the type of data to enable quick understanding for the user. That's what the jury had to say. So with this, I'm glad to introduce the key people behind this product. Mariana Spagnuolo, she's a design lead at Wondr and a designer focusing on user-centered design and UX methods. Mariana has been working from illustration, branding, and publishing to prototyping, user research, and interaction design for international clients in places such as Sao Paulo, Tokyo, Melbourne, and Barcelona, and she's now based in Dublin. Whereas Peter Delaney, he's product director of Wondr. He's a specialist in Agile and Scrum methods. He leads and connects the product, UX, and technical teams at Wondr, working across fields such as fintech, blockchain, the energy sector, even insurances, and on Web3 or crypto applications. So above welcome to both of you. And with this, I would like to hand the screen to you, Peter and Mariana.
Hi guys, it's a pleasure. I'd like to say thank you for giving us the privilege of being able to talk you through this deep dive and indeed winning the award as well. So I'm going to get started, share my screen, and we'll go down through it. Share and play. So here we are. So the agenda for today, we'll do it relatively fast and try to get through it in about 30 minutes. So we'll leave plenty of time for questions therefore after. So we'll give a brief overview, an insight into the discovery and definition, an insight into the design and detailing, an insight into the development and testing, development analysis, the results, and we'll also talk a small bit about net zero for 2040, which is an objective for ESB itself. So here's an introduction video just to get us started. So again, into the overview. So in relation to this project, the context of this was every day across Ireland and the UK, ESB, which is an abbreviation for Electricity Supply Board, uses a variety of tools, an awful lot of tools, to interface and manage and monitor their energy, their supplies, and indeed the trading of energy as well. What that actually caused was a little bit of a problem for the staff, as they needed to gather information from many different resources and aggregate them into information and make the actual decisions. In all, that meant to make a decision they had to get that particular data, which caused a time constraint. From there, that data is not exactly in real time because it comes from sheets, bits of paper, Excel sheets, many different Power BI applications as well. Multiple non-verified sources of truth also caused confusion because there was many different same values coming from different points that were actually contradicting each other, which in all caused a small bit of confusion for the business as well. And then they weren't able to source or visualize the wind forecast as well. That in all then caused confusion for their constraints and energy rules because they couldn't be visualized either. So what we tried to do was we tried to make an application that would work for that to bring it closer together. In relation to the net zero strategy for 2040 and to be 100% renewable for ESB themselves, this tool would then become a vital tool for that to reach those particular targets, because in all then they were able to forecast renewable energy through RTV. It was one particular source of truth because the data monetization would go into one particular database, which we would like to call a data warehouse, a bit of a technical term, and then they were able to forecast it from there. So even from last month, they were able to see that 33% of Ireland's energy was actually generated through, which was a statistic actually verified by RTV itself. In the future, we'll also be adding new different types of renewables, i.e. battery, solar, hydrogen, and we'll also be looking at new interconnections as well, which is how power is actually sold to different countries as well. Okay. The solution, to develop a user-friendly, centralized go-to visualization hub that is one source of truth to improve the operational and financial efficiencies of ESB and indeed the grid itself. Let's talk about how we actually got there. So, in plain and simple terms, we have a core process here in Wondr and indeed in ESB to define out an actual project. So we have discovery and definition, we have design detailing, we have development and testing, and then we have deploy and analysis. In each particular stage, we have it broken out into what the actual deliverables for. So the design team engaged users and stakeholders to gather requirements and outline of the actual project. So in that, we were able to do costings around the actual business itself, what is actually needed from the business and indeed from ourselves to forecast out that particular work. We did many interviews with stakeholders, meetings and on-site visits as well. From those stakeholder meetings and on-sites, we had discovery sessions, which fed into then a Moscow or a minimal viable product like an MVP. And then from that MVP, we used that to generate stories, to build out a UX prototype, user testing analysis, and then final sign off of the UX within the definition phase. So I'll just give you a few screenshots of the actual things that happened. We did user interviews. So here you can see many different stations using many different things. We interviewed the engineers, traders, the station managers, stakeholders to understand how they actually work. We even looked at what to do on a day-to-day basis, even on a timescale. So getting up at, let's just say 7 o'clock in the morning, going into work, getting your coffee, and then after that, kind of looking at these particular broadsheets to see what their forecast for the day, reviewing those broadsheets all the way up to about 12 o'clock, and then actioning their work after that. So you can kind of see how reviewing stuff and data at the start of the morning became a massive part of their actual day-to-day activity. We did exactly the walkthroughs of how it was actually used and how it was actually worked on. The site visits themselves, we actually had a great time. We got to see so many stations around Ireland, and indeed pump stations as well. It was very interesting again to just see the scale of these actual stations, because I know we're working on a visualization of the particular data, but there's a massive amount of skill and a massive amount of people behind the actual work that's there and those particular stations. I believe there was like 16,000 employees within ESB and 4,000 engineers actually working on these stations on a day-to-day activity. Then we did some team workshops with the key stakeholders. Those key stakeholders were from power generation, trading, and the data teams to share our findings and outline the actual project itself. From there, we actually kind of figured out that we have certain personas. Those certain personas look at things in different ways and want different objectives. So we tried to kind of figure out what exactly they needed from a data standpoint, and then try to incorporate it in the most simplistic way into those visuals and into those dashboards as well. Here is a quote from Generation and Trading, where RTV allows plant managers to update themselves on the commercial positionings of their plants in a clear, quick and visual and accurate way. Yeah, it speaks for itself really. From there, we went into the design detailing process. We employed Agile to move fast, to transition smoothly through the actual design testing and indeed the user stories. So the Moscow that we actually created in the first initial phase became user stories that could be brought through in a UX UI sprints. And indeed those user stories for that MVP release also transitioned into the development cycle as well. While we did those MVPs, we also moved on to user testing with the engineers as well, to just make sure that we validate the actual data with them, to make sure that what they saw is what they envisaged and particular items needed to be iterated from there. We also tested then with people outside of our stakeholder engagement within ESB to see how they feel and think about having this visual tool at hand every day for them to be able to use. We also then finalized our style library, which you can call a design system, which allowed us as designers and indeed the developers to be able to rapidly iterate out different designs and stuff moving forward, because it's a manual release project. And then we moved into front-end sprints, where we actually created the HTML templates, finalized the actual JSON data that was needed to get that visualization of the data up into a UI standpoint. And we also test and integrate. Documentation from here was also key as an element to make sure that onboarding developers would be easy enough, and indeed after the first iteration, onboarding new development teams as well moving forward could be as easy and as smooth as possible. From there, we actually went through the sprints, the sketches, and collaborated working through workshops. Again, we didn't want to go straight into the Figma design of things. We just wanted to validate things, especially with the stakeholders there, and then to just get that quick user-centric feedback. With that feedback, we know that they're onboarded and confident in what we're trying to envisage for them, and they kind of know what to expect coming forward, which then fed into the UX concept of the actual screens. So here's an example of the dashboard. Here's an example of the stations page. From there, getting validation again from the business, again, those key stakeholders were also key in that to make sure it was validated. And while all that was happening in the background, it was the monetization of the data and getting that ready so we could do the actual development into the UI prototypes. So it went from UX into the UI prototype. It's a bit of color, it's a bit of skin. It is in a dark format because these particular screens were going to be shown every day. People are going to be staring at them for quite some time. So we do have a light team and a dark team in ESB itself for these particular applications. This application moved forward with the dark team itself. And again, because it's a responsive format, it goes from everything from a 4K television, which is used in the businesses, all the way down to the smallest device, which is mobile phone. And here's the generation view of the next prototype that is coming along. We also have reporting, which is also going to be a, how would you call it, a user-centric approach for a user to be able to self-serve themselves, to be able to do reports as they move forward. The data lab as well is going to be the next release as it comes along as well. All that tied into the actual design system that was built and put in place, so it could be iterated out from the ESB product team for many other applications as well. So the other applications, dam monitoring, station signals, maintenance forecasting, TADA, and Power BI as well. So we try to instill the same brand across all of their applications moving forward as well. A quote from Anna in ESB, who is the product owner. RTV is considered an essential product by all our stakeholders embedding our daily operations, therefore helping us to achieve our net zero neutrality strategy for 2040. Then into development and test. So in development and test, the creation of the templates and the finalization of those particular components into a full UI template library, or I should say HTML front-end library, which then had data structures to be able to facilitate the development team in the handover and integration. So we ended up with the full dark team, we ended up with the HTML templates, we ended up with the extensive API endpoints of JSON data that was needed to structure the actual data that was coming from the data warehouse into the actual application as well, along with full documentation for the actual developers and indeed future developers to be able to take both the toolkit and the data and reiterate them if needed. So we'll give a few examples. Toolkit, relatively straightforward, again, built on Bootstrap, which can be integrated into React moving forward as well for what you call apps, native apps, and indeed applications moving forward. The HTML templates themselves, all fully functional based on dummy data supplied by ESB, so the integration could be smooth. And then the actual endpoint information, how it's structured, full documentation around it, and how it's actually delivered. And that documentation is actually extensive. Release 1B for their actual data there for timeline data. So they're able to forecast from the past in 72 hours all the way into the future, which is 24 hours ahead of time, which is something that they've never had before as well. And then the actual roadmaps themselves and how things are put together. There you can see an example of the requirements, which are actually the user-centric stories that revolve around the particular release. And then this was the final release scope for the actual phase 1 of the project. And then Darren Octor, who is the CIO analyst for generation trading in ESB. RTV blends markets, business assets, and station information, creating a business narrative in a clear, compelling, and engaging way to help inform the audience on decision making. Its success is evident in its daily use by station managers, engineers, traders, and indeed the high-level executives as well. So finally, we move on to results. Results. It ended up being an excellent project within ESB. It ended up being an excellent project for us as well. It clarified that a single source of truth is key when it comes to actual data and being able to drive a business forward. So the single source of truth came within ESB. It generated greater collaboration within the business because they're all reading from the same hymn sheet, and indeed for their third parties as well. It provided substantial savings around KPIs in decision making and preventing of fines. RTV also is helping in forecasting and innovating to meet the net zero 2040 strategy. It's a benchmark product process for both design and development. And again, it was delivered on time, on budget, in an agile methodology. The future for the actual project itself, we've actually got 4 releases coming up, which is segregated out over 2 years, hopefully. And we've also are in talks to include 2 more releases after that. So the future is expanding the data to incorporate renewable assets like batteries, hydrogen, and solar, increased investment in new functionality like station details, renewable value breakdowns, indeed dam monitoring, and being able to monitor stuff like that as well. A release roadmap to plan for self-service reporting and maintenance forecasting, which is a very intricate part of being able to manage the complete assets across ESB as well. Maintenance forecasting will be a small bit of a trick in AI as well to try and drive home deliverables for that as well. And then the creation of many products outlining using the process and using the design system like dam monitoring and other Power BI applications. And that's it, guys. That's our presentation. Thank you.
Right, I had a technical glitch on this side, so we're all human. Thanks so much, Peter and Mariana. So everybody out there, please feel free to post your questions so we can bring them in, or if you're on Zoom, feel free just to chip in. Thanks so much for this very quick jump through an enormously complex project. And I guess there's many questions that we can now go into. And beforehand, we talked about this project, and he told me it was a 4-year-long development. So what you packed into 20 minutes is just an enormous amount of time and work, of course. So just to set out and describe it a little bit better. So the RTV, how is it embedded in your client's work environment? So which parts of the workflow does it cover?
Yeah, it connects different departments within ESB. So that's part of what, like in our discovery at the start, we started with a few users and then it grew. So we started talking with engineers in power plants, for example, and trying to find out about their needs. But then we felt that we saw that there was need as well. So we needed to talk to trading, for example, because they would benefit from this integration. And then those 2 types of users are from the get-go, from the start. We are trying to work with them to understand where the data come from, how can we build the data warehouse to help them improve the product, and how they can use this single source of truth to make their decisions. And then later on, then we knew that this was needed as well. We can, because all the data is there, right? So how can we use that for reporting as well, for managers and directors? Because reporting is a big part of course of the business. So now we're integrating, I think it's coming this year, it's the reporting section of it, which will help people to make decisions on the go, but also predict things like maintenance of power plants and hydro dams and so on. Those are 3 aspects, so 3 types of users and 3 departments, very segmented departments that are using this. Added to that, then there is like within each user, each field type is another subsection of a user type. So, for example, wind engineers will use this application in a way that hydro engineers would use in a different way. So, for the future, we hope to drill it down and add more functionality to it to let these other nuances come in to the project.
Yeah, And again, it also expands, I'll expand on the wind as well. Like many other people know, there's plenty of wind turbines around different countries. Ireland is quite small, but has a lot of wind. So we have a lot of different wind turbine sites across and around Ireland itself. Each particular part of Ireland is broken up into the individual sections. So the traders would actually be able to see and forecast, right, there's wind coming down on the Munster line or the south of Ireland itself. That wind is going to pick up and move up around the west or Connacht, at some stage through the day. They're able to predict and forecast up to a 24-hour element now using RTV as well. And again, it all ties down into who's looking at it and who's looking at it at the right time. Like the way the high-level execs are looking at the top level, the system demand of what Ireland is, the wind generation currently at this time, the price imbalance, the margin tightness, they're all terms within the energy forecasting sector, but it gives them the key points and the key information to be able to look at it on a day-to-day basis or even into 24 hours in the future to be able to forecast that. And they all use it in their own particular way.
Right, so I understand it started out as projects very often do on a limited scale and grew and grew and grew because you understood that there is other user groups involved and they need to be involved to make it really work, right? Before we go into the UX and the design process, which I think there's several details that are interesting, I guess. Julian asked, how did you actually land this project? Very basic question. I think it fits right here at the start. Did the client approach you, or what was the story behind it?
Wow. Yeah, it's a very long time ago. So back in about 2017, I think around December time, or even before that, November time, we went into ESB to kind of just have general conversations. Over the past while, before I was talking to ESB, I was working on data warehouses and visualization of many different data points for other companies. And I kind of got talking to generation trading with the people in there to try and see what way or things they were thinking about. And this kind of landed on our lap when we started talking to Anna and Darren in relation to they want to have a single source truth. And then I kind of talked to them multiple times over that until we finally got to a stage where we could propose a kind of a design sprint methodology, which is our discovery methodology, to kind of put them on the right path to kind of estimate how much or how long is a piece of string in relation to this particular project. And then I kind of tried to bite size it down so we could have different phase releases around it. So in all, it was kind of through word of mouth, having conversations with the right people and indeed at the right time to be able to get that particular project. And again, it worked.
I think we were working on different projects for ESB, which were related in a way of like, there was reporting involved, there was like maps and things like that. And then at the same time, I think from Anna's perspective, they were also starting to build that data warehouse, seeing that need and investigating that. And then I think all came together at the same time. It was a mix of things.
So while we are actually here at the project start and at the beginning of the client agency relationship, then I'll just stick with this because I think it's a huge complex project, and your experience here of this story of this many years of work is really valuable. So let's stick a little bit around this kind of client process and progress. So I'm wondering, in your eyes, who did you really need to convince and above and foremost to get into a user-centered process on this? Because you can also go top down as it often happens.
Yeah, you certainly can. I'll start on that one. The convincing wasn't on the business side. It was more the convincing of the engineers themselves and certain people to show that we're not just in there to make an objective and meet that objective. We're actually here to try and make their day-to-day activity actually help. And I suppose there's many stories that tie down to that. One particular high up engineer, I tried to get him imagine to what would happen if something, I don't know, something happened where a station actually just completely stopped, and how long would it take until it would be noticed? How long would you have to get up, get into the office, download sheets, look at those sheets, analyze those sheets, see how long, when did it happen and how long did it happen? Whereas to make life a little bit easier, that particular person could actually view it on their phone, be able to see when it actually switched off, so to be able to pinpoint where that particular data point ended or where it actually stopped, and then move forward and investigate that way to see what way it could be prevented in the future. Certain things like that. I've had a person who only today texted me to say it was a lifesaver, because literally because how everybody is working at home now and how basically the world of the workplace has slightly changed over the last few years. It's now in her pocket. It is literally a lifesaver because she's able to interact, view, react all from at home with this particular application, because in the past it would have been on sheets, it would have been locked down information that is only accessible within the ESB or indeed the station itself. So it has pushed and brought things back that way.
Yeah, and I think it took a bit of convincing at the start for the discovery sessions, because it's like these people are working and they are so knowledgeable about what they do and how they do day to day, and they do in a certain way, engineers and traders and the directors. And then we come from the outside and we start asking questions that might be silly, questions that might be so simple, and we don't know what their day to day is. So it took a little bit of convincing, I suppose one session at a time, and all that with, I think their product leader on their side was on board with us then, to invite all these people to talk to us and tell us the basics of what they do and help us investigate all of that. And they might have been thinking, why is this? It's like these people, they don't know anything. But then, of course, afterwards, we found out that all the discovery sessions actually really helped the business as well to investigate where the data is coming from and what people need, because then you talk to 20 people and you find out that there is like hundreds or thousands of different data sets, but there is 15 things that everyone's looking at. For example, wind or imbalance price, and these are just words, I suppose, for a lot of people. Like, then that helped us to convince then the business that, look, you have to do the discovery, you have to do the talking. That's the only way. We're not like confronting anyone, where it's more of like a collaboration. And then after, I suppose, 6 months of doing it and then showing me the results, then after that, it became easier then to do the sessions, because they saw the value on it.
So did you actually have a brief to do these sessions, to do these workshops, or did it grow organically? Because you also said, Mariana, when we talked beforehand, that discovery was a very large part of the project. And I now understand it was a large part of the project also for you, because you had to understand such a complex environment and all the different tools they were working with that you showed in the presentation also. But how did you set up this project? How did you also then convince people to invest more and more into it?
Yeah, I suppose I'll start on that one. So what happened at the very start was we took a little small bite-sized chunk of the data and kind of went, right, how would we actually try to visualize that? Literally, that started with the map, okay? From that, even before we did the discovery sessions or the discovery methodology, we proposed a return brief to them to say, this is what we think we would need to do to be able to facilitate for the visualization of that map. I think it was between 3 to 5 workshops, a few interviews, a few stakeholder sessions, and then diving down into data visualization and where that particular stuff comes from in that return brief. Because it's bite-sized, the risk to the business is not large. It means to them that they're getting something for a relatively low cost, which could actually validate the project. And that's really what the discovery sessions were doing. They were validating that these particular data points, these particular needs are needed by a wide variety within the business. And then from there and those discoveries, we were able to forecast and estimate how much time would actually take to do the UI, user testing, the front end code, the data visualization, and indeed the data points themselves through the API for them so they could progress it out. And small bite-sized chunks, that's still why we're doing it in a very small release format as well, because when you have an overhauling and an overarching project that has loads of different information, it becomes, even for me and even for everyone working in the business, it becomes too much to be able to absorb. So you have to kind of try to progress it through in a bite-sized manner. And indeed, Agile works for that.
Yeah, I think so. That's I think the initial brief was something like we have here in the presentation. So look, we have all these spreadsheets and all these documents that we have to look at all the time, but we can't see everything at the same time. So how can we merge all of this? That was the first brief. But once we started investigating this brief, we find out that then, in speaking to people, we found out that actually there is a bigger road. So there is, I suppose, a 6-month brief, a short brief that we deliver that on time. But then also there is a long-term roadmap that came out of that. And then this long-term roadmap is what we are working on. I suppose every year we do release 1 or 2 items, which is owned by the business, and then the business rolls it out over time. Because of course, big part of it is us, what you have seen there, like design system to allow for this scalable product to grow. But another part is the data, is the day-to-day, which is the business that owns that, and they have to grow with that. And then that's part of the collaboration as well. Like what can be done now, what can be done then, how much can we do discovery, how much can we evolve this particular project. We know that there are like a lot of things that we could do more, like user testing to find out details about what the user needs and things like that, which are coming up hopefully this year. So there is a long-term roadmap, and then there was a short term at the start that took about 6 months for us to get to the first MVP.
So basically, you did what the client asked you for, and then you showed them a little bit more. And that was the key, which maybe design is best at. It's at showing, not telling, right? Yeah. And picking a subject where everybody can see the difference, like a map, as you said. And then showing them also in maybe investing a little bit of time extra just to showing them where it could go to. And then chopping up a very big complex subject into smaller pieces, make it more digestible, and actually trying to put forward even like a proposal of a structure where you could go to, right?
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, how did you then set up the project with the client? So you talked about requirements, a roadmap, approvals, plans. So just very shortly, give us an idea. How did you help them to grasp this as something doable?
Yeah, so again, going back into the discovery sessions where I was talking about the MVP in the Moscow. The Moscow is a format that I use to kind of go, right, must have, could have, should have, won't have, based around the concept that we actually proposed to them. The must then turned into the first release for the map, or indeed the dashboard screens. From there, it was just a little iteration to write out the actual user-centric stories based around those particular screens, to then tie in the actual front-end code and the data along with it. When we created those user-centric stories were used across the entire life cycle of that release. Went from UX, UI, front-end, back-end, integration, deployment, testing, and out the door. It went the whole way around. Fortunately, when we wrote those stories, we were able to forecast how much time would it actually take to do each one of those individual stories, so we could give them an actual roadmap for that specific release, all the way down to the individual people that are working on it. Yeah.
And so, how did you, what do you think, what are like the essential roles in such a project on your side in terms of abilities, knowledge, but also on the client side, which I think is also key, like how did you pick the right stakeholders to work with? And would be the right stakeholders or the best roles from your client, do you believe, to tackle such a project?
Yeah, so yeah, in relation to the stakeholders, I believe we interviewed 26 people in total. The reason why there was 26 people in total was because of like the way Mariana broke down different station types, and then each individual station is a different fuel type, and breaking them down. So we had to meet those individual people to find their needs. Then after that, it was on to the analytics and trading people and meeting those particular people and finding out what exactly their needs are from a day-to-day basis. So the stakeholder engagement obviously drove the interviews and what was actually needed. And then in relation to the people that were actually needed to drive the project, it was obviously a group of people within ESB that have the same ethos, that believe and in trust in data and kind of know what's going to happen and can predict what is needed in the future. So we met those particular people to deep dive into their brains. We had to, because it's all in here, and then we had to deep dive into it and ask the stupid questions, like you said, to find out what it all means. And from there, then we were able to segregate it out, break it out, put it into layman's terms, much like the presentation we have there today, and then try and drive home what was actually needed from those guys. Because a lot of people are engineers there, a lot of people have their own documents and ways of doing things, but we had to just bring it across the top level to try and find the similarities between all those particular people to be able to get the right information up onto a dashboard and up onto data visualization tools. Okay.
How did you convince management? So but not only management, I think also the engineering people, I guess it's a lot is about KPIs. So how was this determined? How were they determined in the project?
I think don't know that we specifically convinced them, because they were already convinced that it was needed. I suppose it was much needed. The data warehouse, it was much needed. It was a long time needed. So I don't think they needed convinced. They knew that they had that as a problem. And then I believe that since the first release, they started actually using this data visualization tool. And I suppose it needs to speak by itself by being used. And then I think that's how we've been convincing more and more people now within ESB by the needs that they have. And then, of course, because it was released, and now once it's released, it's like, is the data going there? Is it accurate? And then there's a whole process going on in day to day for them to keep that data there, to keep that data accurate and all that. So if you can trust that data that's there, then you can buy in. So I think that's a daily battle, I believe, internally.
It is neat.
And one that is not much convincing, but just trusting it.
And again, like I was saying with it being a lifesaver for certain people, when we actually followed a person on their day-to-day, sat down beside them and went through and watched, not really watched, but kind of reviewed what they were doing on a day-to-day, looking at sheets, trying to forecast what actually the station needs to do for the entire day. That becomes nearly a full-time job. So they were spending half their time looking at data to try and visualize, or trying to mentally jot down, oh, I need to power up the station at this particular time, or this station is going to turn off at this time. We need to ramp down and all that kind of thing. It takes up a major majority of their skills and takes up a major majority of their time. So with the data visualization that's coming with Indeed Station Signals and RTV and the multiple releases, it's going to make their time a hell of a lot more valuable because they'll be able to spend it on other things rather than
Yeah, and I think one thing that Anna was saying is that, for example, now, before it was difficult. For example, ESB has to investigate certain procedures and items with the grid, so our energy grid within Ireland, and they have to discuss a lot of stuff. Before, it was difficult to find this data in many different sources, which were not integrated. And now it's much easier for their directors to discuss things with the grid, because they all know that there's this one source and they can trust the data, and then they can put together quick reports and see on the same dashboard what's going on.
Exactly. And again, I know for a fact the senior management do use it from a day-to-day aspect, looking at it, skimming over it, rather than looking at the reports nowadays, because they trust the data that's there. It's also used as well. I know this in a bit of insight. Traders, when they trade, need to validate why they're trading and how they're trading. With the data visualization that comes from RTV, they're able to back up their decision making to say why they traded at that moment in time, and it could come down to many of the different data points that are there, like margin tightness and balance price, to validate I traded at this time because the imbalance price was going to go lower and we needed to make the maximum profit out of it. And that's a good way to validate that particular workflow as well.
Right. Thanks so much. We got several questions that are actually going back to basics. So let's jump actually into the design process a little bit. First of all, you showed just a quick slide, some sketchings and insight sessions. But can you give us a bit more enlightening about the user research and testing? Which kind of methods did you use? Which kind of tools?
Yeah, we did. Well, a lot of the user testing was 101 user testing in person. And that at that time before COVID, it's like was easy to do that way. So we did a lot. There was starting with sketching. So the sketching part was very interesting. I think was the best use of time for all of us, because when we were doing sessions with the users, we would offer them paper and pen to design, because a lot of the time they were able to help us to design charts and graphs and things and visualize the data in ways that they would like to see. I think that was a very nice thing. It saved us a hell lot of time, make us get it right very quickly. So that was why I think the sketching was there in the presentation, because it was an important phase. Like they say, when you sketch, it's easy. You have new ideas all the time. You can throw away what doesn't work, keep what works, work together. And then that was great. And then after the sketching, after we got that right, so this is the type of graphs that we want. This is more or less the layout that we need between us and the teams in ESB. We moved to prototyping, and then in prototyping we did create a few versions of dashboards, and then a few versions of different charts as well, a few versions of maps, and then we showed it back to some of the people we had already interviewed. So, this is what we're looking. What do you think? And then also we showed to people who had never seen it to see if they would be able to understand the data that was there. So we would say, show the chart, show the dashboard, and say, ask them, look, exactly, just very open questions. What do you see? Can you tell me a story about what you see in this dashboard? And then they go, yeah, I can see that the imbalance price is this, and that. I can see that you have more coal stations are high on the chart. They can see which stations or fuel types are using more energy, or you can see that, for example, that the wind is high, so it doesn't need as much energy from the other sources. And that was now I remember one thing that was interesting when we first did the living and learning. Now, when we first did the first prototype, the data on the charts and the data and the information was dummy data. And then the first person we showed that in the business, they were simply unable to understand anything that was there, because even everything is in the right places, in the right colors. They can't read something that isn't 100% what it would be. So if you put fake numbers in a data visualization prototype, people won't be ready to test it for you. So that's one thing I've learned anyway on this project, that when you're designing for data, you really, really need to understand, because a chart is not just a chart, it's a story about the real world. So you have to really know, what number is that? Is it like the imbalance price, for example?
Yeah.
You can't put a fake imbalance price on something and ask someone to do that. So I think that was a good learning for us. And then, that's how we did one-on-one interviews, asking very open questions and showing them a lot of different options and asking them what they think of that. And then collecting all the data like per usual, and then trying to figure out where to improve. And
again, during each one of those particular sessions, all that's recorded. And when we actually finish each phase of the project, like the discovery and definition, we actually return those results in the presentation back to the business as well, so they have that information going forward. Like the scripted testing that Mariana was on about, it was all based and targeted towards the original mission statements that come from the actual business as well, and making sure that we validate the actual KPI for that release as well. That's it.
Yeah, in this case, the KPI, it was more like understanding the information than the functionality in itself. For this first phase anyway, I know for now that now we have done more improvements to the interaction side of things since then. But at the start, it was quite simple, so it's more understanding what's there. And now we have moved, and it's more complex, so we have to work on the functionality and more like interaction design aspect of it.
Yeah.
Right. There was also questions exactly on this in this area on the UI. Actually, I'm wondering how much time did you take from the sketches to first UI prototypes that you showed your users?
How long it took to design?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if I remember correctly, the discovery methodology that we used, we have different methodologies. We have a design sprint methodology, which probably everyone knows, which is a 5-day exercise. We have a 1-day crazy 8 kind of exercise as well. But the exercise that we used in this particular definition is a 21-day exercise. So I believe from the sketches, which we did within a day, we kind of went into a UX concept in about 3 to 4 days to try and drive it and bring it into the actual business, because we needed to keep it on track and fresh within the minds of the stakeholders that we were engaging with as well. Exactly. And then from there, it's all going back to the problem statement, the hypothesis of the actual release, along with the mission statement as well. And we try to bring it that way.
And there was a question from Chris Coletta actually on the UI and the design patterns that you developed there. Did you do any competitive research in terms of the dashboard interface and choosing the best ways to display the information visually? Or did you come up with everything from scratch on your own?
Oh, no. We did a lot of the walkthroughs that we've done with the users. They have shown us a lot of the stuff that they use day to day. Some of the users, some of the engineers, they build a system themselves. So we learned a lot from them, from what was being used at the time. So it might have been, we took a lot of inspiration from what they were using. So we didn't obviously come up with everything ourselves. On the competitive research for UI, though, it was a little bit tricky because this is the kind of like internal application that is hard to find outside. It's hard to type. You don't find too much on like internal energy system, data visualization. It's a bit tricky to find like that kind of like you can't go to Dribble and find that kind of stuff. So that, I suppose, as I use interaction point of view, I relied on other types of dashboards from other business types to look at how are they doing, how are they solving this kind of interaction problem. So how can I display five different types of charts in one screen and still make it possible for one to see, or how do they use filters, how do they use the map? So I used a lot of different types of benchmark from different business and different industries. But for the data itself then and the charts that are on there, we used a lot of internal tools that we already had as base.
So you basically built a bridge between what the world that they know and the data they know and the visuals that they use and external sources to build a visual interface. And of course, I guess also about the UX use flows of the dashboard, you would really have also to come with something that really touches on their workflows, and there wasn't something out of the box just to present there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, there wasn't. During the research I did look for references, but it's really very tricky to find that kind of thing because it doesn't really exist much out in the open. So yeah, that's a good question, because it is actually very tricky to find that kind of reference.
Yeah, it was very easy to find data visualization applications that are friendly to the user in the real world, but not to engineers and what they actually specifically need, because a lot of it is just viewing. Of course, RTV in the future will be interacting and also manipulating as well of that data for reports. So we try to start with the easy visuals first, trying to instill a design system that will fit, especially for future use. And we also try to rely on our skill sets that we had previously from other projects that we had working within the business and indeed outside of the business as well.
So actually, there was also a question from Timo Sohali, and he wondered if you actually did some actual design audits of the dashboard and UI then before implementing it.
Audit? How does it mean?
Yeah, so we did do, and we do it now as well. We do have AI tools that will monitor the consistency and visual eye representation of the user and how they can read data, or indeed cognitively be able to absorb the data on the page. So we use those particular tools at the start to validate the UX and the UI experience. After that, we did revalidate with the actual stakeholder by walking them through in a one-to-one, much like user testing, but just to make sure that we've hit the actual nail on the head, if you want to say, for the actual screens as well. They, like what Mariana was saying, they came back and said that data is wrong. We didn't know if that data was wrong. This is the data we wanted to represent. But we learned that if we do true data in a dummy format for those particular users and let them be able to just look at it, scan it, read it, maybe interact with it then to get their actual feeling from it, they're able to come back and give us a good audit reprimand on the actual design itself.
Right. Okay. So this sounds like much more a made-to-measure project, although it is very technical and large in scale and based on hard data and a very strict regulated, probably also work processes. So you have
again, think of it this way as well. There was a few requirements that we had to adhere to as well in relation to the UI design and so forth. We had to adhere to using Google Charts, using Google Maps. So there's a limitation on what we can actually do with them from a UI and indeed a UX standpoint. But at least we know that those particular points they're accessible. They can be manipulated very easily. They have an extensive roadmap. Yeah, exactly. They have an expensive roadmap. So we know that the life cycle of Google Maps and indeed Google Charts is going to be around for a very long time. So that was one of the main objectives as well, to make sure that the tech decisions that we've decided on as well will live the life cycle of the entire projects as well.
Yeah, one thing that was an outcome about the project, I think a happy one, is that like, because with the way we did, everything's responsive. So you have this very complex data there, but like you actually can see everything from your phone. And then people are actually using it on their phones to see it. So I think that's an interesting one that in the end, it came out like in a good way, you know. The mobile experience is actually a good one. And people actually look at these charts on their phones, which I was surprised to hear, but it's true. So that was an interesting outcome as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you would think, sorry, you would think it's a very complex field of work, and not something that you would just glance at a phone. And actually, you also had very different user groups, right? You had managers, operators, traders, so they had completely different kinds of views that they need and kinds of information. So how did you combine all of this in one dashboard?
At the very start for the first release, we did combine that information. The reason behind that, again, was one of the parts of the mission statements or the goals was to make sure that layman people like myself or whoever else is looking, can actually see where and how the data interacts or works and comes from. So at the start, we did have all of the data there at the same time. Over a period of time and over a period of series releases, it has changed to be based around user type as well. So we do have different sections for different users. Certain users can look at the constraint maps. I know that doesn't mean anything to anybody here, but they can look at the rules around why certain power stations are turning on versus other power stations, and why certain things happen in certain ways. So all that information is there for those particular types of users as well.
Yeah, we did. I think we had to compromise eventually because there was a lot of information to be displayed. And then in the first release, the idea was, look, if we have an MVP, we have a minimum viable product, we have this minimum amount of, boxes to tick. And then we did release the first one. And then yes, the answer would be yes, everything is in one dashboard. But after the first release, then we needed to create different sections for different user types as it grew. For example, one that is coming up now is like the hydro stations. They need a certain, the hydros is called the monitor. So the hydros, we have now introduced the hydro station users to the project, say. So they need the hydro stations, they need maintenance. And then one part of this, the RTV now is to allow people in the hydro stations to input data on how the dam is doing as a structural point of view, and then to show how the dam is like, to make sure that the dam is running smoothly. And then that's one aspect, for example, that of course then is a new user type. So then we have to allocate for that. So I suppose if you log in as that type of user, you can see that part of the application. But if you don't log in as that type of user, you wouldn't have access to that. Yeah. So that's how we're working now with different user types and trying to minimize the amount of information that is being played.
And again, to lead on that as well, yes, you could be a hydro type user, but you could only be assigned to one particular hydro plant. So that user just has to be given sole access to be able to input data for that particular asset or that particular plant. And that comes down to weekly reports, multiple instrument reports. It gets into the nitty-gritty of the engineering scale for those particular power plants. It has taken time, but it is actually coming together quite nicely.
Yeah.
So just to wrap it up about the product itself, I mean, you told me beforehand that actually the company has been developing it. You did the UI, the the design, created templates, a design system, but how do you ensure the UX is kept consistent when it's grown or when it's growing and the client is actually coding it?
Yeah. So that's because from the start we worked with design library and components. So the way you have your Lego set there, everything from the start is the same style, same visuals. Everything we build that is new for that library, we make sure that works with the rest. And then we just keep growing that library. So that's how now it's much easier for us to actually design on this project because the library is really huge now after 3-4 years. So whenever there is a new phase coming, we know, okay, we already have forms. Okay, we use that forms that already exist in that library too. And they're all gonna work together. They're all gonna be responsive. It works with the dark theme and all that. There is a light theme aspect to it now. So when we were doing last year some reporting sections, actually some of the users said that they needed a light mode. So when you introduce light mode, then you have to work with the components all together again, and then that's the more and more complex it gets, the more needs that come. But that's how we did. So work with atomic design, libraries and components. So it is really, everything is customizable.
And very probably you're consulting the client continuously, so you're not letting them work on the Legos on their own. Otherwise, it could become a tower that becomes tipsy and turvy. You never know.
Yeah, over time, like sometimes you do see a little bit of creep, if you want to call it that. But that's okay. Like that design system is there for them to use. If there is a little bit of creep, we expect that over time it gets rectified and it gets fixed as well along the way. So it's not about people making it top heavy. We're just trying to make sure that everyone has the power to be able to use it and to be able to iterate out their own designs as well.
Yeah, and if there is a bit of creep, maybe it's because the design system is not
it's our fault.
It's not good enough for that kind of aspect of it. So we have to maybe review that,
Right. There was one element that was actually also asked from the public, and it's about artificial intelligence. It's about advanced technology, and I guess there's a lot of room in such a complex environment. And you've been talking about predicting data, predicting inputs. So which kinds of assistive or advanced technologies are at work here, and which ones could be added in the future? What do you think? And also in which fields?
Exactly. So over time, there is machine learning within ESB as a business, and it's an entire sector to themselves. But there's a double combination here. So we have a data warehouse that is able to manipulate data in an ETL format, evaluate, transform, load. So that's what it does to load the information into RTV itself. Over time, we've been slowly introducing levels of functionality for that data to be able to say when that data is at this specific number, start throwing out specific colors and alerts based around it. That's where it's starting to go with the maintenance forecasting. So it starts off as a function that is embedded into the actual ETL of the data itself, but over time, we're starting to consider, can a machine actually predict when a wind turbine is going to fault? For instance, we tried to use this analogy when we were going through that particular exercise in Discovery. Pretend you have 10 wind turbines up on the top of a hill, and 9 of those wind turbines are working at 100% efficiency. But there's one turbine that over the past few months has been decreasing slowly, like 1 or 2% efficiency based around it. Now that entire station or turbine station would have analytical data to see where that's actually happening. So it could be a ball bearing, it could be something very small within the actual wind turbine itself. It could be a fault on a line even. From there, a machine will be able to kind of anticipate when it becomes viable to get it replaced or viable to have maintenance on it. And again, when you have maintenance on a turbine, that's grand, you're doing it on one particular turbine. But if you have maintenance on Turlock Hill, which is a, oh, why did I mention Turlock Hill? That's very hard to explain. It's a water pumped hydro plant, if you want to call it that way. That particular hydro plant will have to shut down completely. And if you shut down that completely, then you have to be able to forecast and manipulate the whole entire system to realize where you can get the extra power from. And that's where the machine learning and indeed the AI is going to come in to be able to factor those in. It'll make the traders' lives a little bit easier, and hopefully over time, it'll make the whole entire ecosystem of ESB a little bit easier as well.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, just to wrap it up, let's step away from the project for a second, and just a question to both of you, Mariana, Peter. Beyond this project itself, what are the developments that you find most intriguing for your work, UX design, and which kind of technologies will have like a big impact you're hoping for, or maybe fearing about?
Yeah, I think I'll talk a bit. So well, actually stepping out of this, but actually this project has been one of the most interesting projects I've ever been into. I really enjoy data visualization and being able to do this with ESB and do work with something that can help to create a more sustainable impact in the future. That is the most exciting thing for me. So I am really excited about that, and then being able to do that. And I'm very passionate about user interaction, so user-centric design. So being able to do that and use the techniques that we know in UX design to achieve it, it's really, really nice. So these are two things that I'm very interested for now and for the future. So being able to talk to people and being able to improve their work. And if that has to do with sustainability, then I think that's a major achievement for me.
Yeah, I suppose for me, I'm writing down, kind of highlighting certain things. On the technology side of things, yes, the AI and machine learning. There has been many exciting forefronts, I suppose, on no-code solutions for people as well. They're interesting aspects of what things could become in the future. So you see a lot of CRMs in no-code solutions now, where you tie different boxes together for transferring of data and all that kind of stuff. Instilling the methodology of design on top of those no-code solutions will become something that will have to be kind of planned out in the future, especially not just in our business, but every business around the world. It becomes part and parcel of how businesses actually work. And then I suppose in relation to ESB, the net zero strategy being 100% carbon neutral, I'm extremely interested in that at the moment. Like, yes, there is batteries coming on board, there's hydrogen, there's solar, but there's also other aspects of it, like what can you use the heat power coming off of certain stations in the future? Can you use it for something else, i.e. heating water, i.e. heating homes, businesses, all those particular things as well. They're the things I'm kind of looking forward to and kind of seeing what's going to happen.
Wonderful. So this is much more or way beyond design, and much more about the impact that we can have through our work, or your work, and technologies, materials, sensors, whatever there may be, on our living environment. And I especially like also your idea, Peter, about the question where, well, actually, what will be the role of design, or what will be designing for no coding technologies and actually new forms, and how you can create solutions, products without having to develop them from scratch. So that will maybe shift the design profession away from creation to more like moderation or systems building.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I still think design will always be key. Like it has to be for an actual individual to be able to use it and to have things on brand. But no-code solutions can get rid of steps in the actual process. So do you need front-end developer? Can the actual designer who is actually building it or designing it on paper and in Figma or UX Pin, could they go into this no-code application and be able to do exactly what they're able to do in Figma? That'll be the exciting part. And then after that, it's seeing those no-code solutions. How can they integrate with other parties, i.e. your CRMs, your different databases that need to transfer data out, indeed, even like e-commerce systems, all those particular things will come along the lines as well. So it's good. It's exciting.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, for sharing these insights, both Mariana and Peter, and good luck for your next steps and in this project and on many more.